What's the scariest thing that happened to you when in someone else's house? Story 1. At around ages 6 to 8, I slept over at a friend's house with my little brother. Her father woke us all up in the middle of the night, had us bundle up, and loaded us into the family minivan. He drove to a gas station and talked the whole way about how a bakery had exploded behind their house. He said the resulting gases and fumes could harm us, so we had to drive as far away as possible. They were also our next-door neighbors, so I was worried about our parents' safety. At the gas station, our friend's mom bought us snacks while he checked the area. I told her I had not heard any explosion and asked about my parents. She must have called them from a payphone during the snack run because they pulled up a few minutes later to take us home. I was terrified to go back. Later, our parents sat us down to explain that our friend's father was sick with something called schizophrenia that causes hallucinations. Story 2, I would go over to my friend's house that my family had met in church, and every time I went, it was always a good time. The family had 4 boys, though I would primarily come to hang out with the one just about my age. It was always fun until one time the eldest boys, their friends, and my friend, the third born, all went to play Truth or Dare. I thought it was strange since it was just boys, and we were heading into a remote open space. Thankfully, they did not let my friend or me participate, and they told us to keep watch. But the game involved daring each other to go into a cardboard box and show their bodies. It was extremely uncomfortable, and I was very young. I do not recall how, but somehow it ended up with just me and the eldest son there. And I have a strange pit in my stomach now that feels like how I felt then. He asked if I was curious about what they were doing, and I am sure I said yes because I probably was. Then he asked if I wanted to see him do it. I do not remember how I reacted, but he got into the cardboard box, pulled his pants down, and exposed himself. He was probably 15 or 16 at the time, and I could not have been older than 8. It was a dark and disturbing moment. It was also a very religious family, which made it even more confusing. I kept that inside for a very long time. Story 3. The daycare my little sisters and I went to was down the street from our house. One day, my then 2 or 3-year-old sister told my mom that her private area hurt and that T, I will not use the real name, who was the daycare lady's husband, had put something there and that it hurt badly. My mom immediately took her to the doctor, where they concluded that she had been harmed and that authorities needed to get involved. Before anything could move forward, the daycare lady told us that her husband had left town and written a note saying he had done terrible things he could not take back and that they would never see him again. When the police arrived, they found inappropriate material, since he had been a photographer, on his private computer involving several kids from the daycare. About 1 or 2 days later, local forest rangers found a body in the woods near a campsite outside of town. They identified him as the husband, with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It chills me to think about the horrible things that happened in that house while I was there. Story 4, I was 11 years old and at my friend's house. His parents and all of his siblings were home. Everyone except his dad was in the front room, and his dad was doing yard work in the backyard. I got up to go to the bathroom, and while passing the back door, I saw that my friend's dad was on a ladder with an electric tree trimmer. Before I looked away, he fell off the top rung and crashed onto the ground. The trimmer was still on and landed next to him, slowly moving toward him, and he was not getting up. I was the only one who saw it happen, so I yelled for my friend and his mom to come quickly and ran outside to pick up the trimmer and move it away. By the time I turned it off and focused on him, everyone else was outside. We helped him up, and his mom took him to the hospital for back pain and a mild concussion. The older siblings watched us while they were gone, and everyone was very grateful that I had needed to use the bathroom. Story 5. This was when I was really young, around 7 or 8, and it is one of those memories where I am not sure if it was real or just a dream, but I will share it anyway. I was with a childhood friend at his house in a remote area. He lived in a rundown place, but his neighbor down the road had a very nice house. He said he wanted to explore, and being a kid in the desert, I was excited. He led us to the neighbor's house and convinced us to climb through the dog door. It was a beautiful house, and I still remember the layout clearly. As we explored, we suddenly heard a door open. My friend thought the owner was gone because the car was not in the driveway, so he assumed we were safe. We ran and hid behind separate leather couches in the living room. The man came into the kitchen wearing a bathrobe and nothing else, got a glass of water, and read a magazine. We watched quietly as he took his time and eventually went back upstairs. We sprinted out of the house and ran back to my friend's home, and I do not think even an Olympic runner could have outrun my 7-year-old sprint. It was scary then, but it is terrifying now to think about what could have happened. Story 6. When I was about 16, I spent the night at my best friend's house. At the time, rumors were spreading that I was gay because I had come out to a previous friend who then shared it with others. My best friend already knew and did not care at all. During the sleepover, I was lying on the floor while he was in his bed, positioned opposite his head and facing the doorway. In the middle of the night, I suddenly got a jolt of adrenaline because I felt like someone was watching me. I still had the blanket over me, so I made a small opening to peek out. The bedroom door was cracked open, even though it had been completely closed when we fell asleep. I stared into the gap and saw what looked like a pair of eyes staring back at me. A terrible feeling settled in my stomach as the eyes scanned the room until they locked directly onto mine. The door slowly opened wider, and I saw a full head lean in, as if trying to get a closer look. Suddenly, this person burst through the doorway shouting, "I caught you!" while ripping the covers off my friend. My friend yelled, shocked, and immediately turned on the light. It was his mother. She stormed out and slammed her door. Neither of us could fall asleep afterward as we tried to make sense of what happened. The next morning, I overheard my friend talking to her while I was in the bathroom. She had heard that I was gay and claimed she always had a feeling, so she was trying to catch me doing something to him in his sleep. Ridiculous was all I could think. I washed up, told my friend I was heading home, and left. Her suddenly appearing like that was terrifying. I never told him the full reason, and we are still best friends, but I avoid his mother completely. Story 7. I went to a stranger's house to give him money because I had accidentally run into him with my bike while he was also on a bike. The first thing I noticed was that his house was incredibly dark, not because the lights were off, but because he had no lights at all. No ceiling lights, no lamps, nothing. He used a flashlight to walk around and find things in his own home. Before I knew it, this man I had spoken fewer than 100 words to was showing me a massive two-handed sword and a matching dagger, both razor sharp. He was the type of person who struggled more with staying silent than with finding things to talk about. And somehow I ended up being shown every room in his house and meeting his pet parrot, which was practically the size of an eagle. I had originally gone there to replace a handmade Italian seat for his bike, but instead he gave me a pair of $30 gloves, his old gloves that had gotten scratched when I hit him, 5 to 10 high-end protein bars, and a glass of strawberry lemonade. It was definitely a strange experience. Story 8. When my significant other and I first started seeing each other, I had recently switched to a non-hormonal birth control after having the Nexplanon implant and no periods for 2 years. The second time I went to his house, I unexpectedly got my period, and my doctor had warned me that it might be heavier than before. That warning turned out to be a huge understatement. I was cuddling with him when I suddenly felt moisture, and not the good kind. So I excused myself to the bathroom. I am not exaggerating when I say I had a steady stream of menstrual blood coming out of me, and my solid black pants were completely soaked through. I had not been expecting my period, so I had no pads or tampons with me, and he lived with 4 single guys, so there were no feminine products in the house. To make things worse, they were also completely out of toilet paper, and I had left my phone in the bedroom, leaving me stranded on the toilet. Once I realized just how stuck I was, I panicked and cried. After what felt like forever, my significant other knocked on the door and asked if I was okay. I told him what was happening, and he was incredibly understanding. He ran to the store to get me tampons, toilet paper, and a pair of pants. I was mortified at the time and scared he would judge me, but looking back now, it is actually a pretty funny memory. Story 9. When I was in high school, I was house sitting for the first time at my best friend's place. He had 2 dogs, and since it was a split-level home, I was downstairs with surround sound watching Event Horizon for the first time. In the middle of the movie, the power suddenly went out, leaving me in complete darkness and confusion for about 5 seconds until it came back on right as the doorbell rang. The dogs went wild, barking at the door, and I started freaking out. I ran upstairs to my friend's room and grabbed the BB gun I knew he kept beside his dresser. Clutching it tightly, I crept back downstairs toward the front door. I turned on the porch light, but no one was there. The dogs were still agitated, and when I looked outside, I noticed it was raining. I had not heard the storm because of the loud movie followed by my pounding heart. I called my mom and casually asked if the power had gone out at our house due to the storm, since we lived only about 5 minutes away. She said, "No, but a funny thing happened." And suddenly the phone line went dead. Now I was really starting to panic because the power was still on, but the phone was dead, and this was back when cell phones were just becoming common and most people still use pagers. After about a minute, while I was trying to rationalize everything, the power cut out again. 5 seconds passed, it came back on, and the doorbell rang again. The dogs lost their minds barking. I had left the porch light on, but saw no one outside. So I herded the dogs downstairs, locked the door, held the BB gun tight against my chest, and finished watching Event Horizon. Story 10. When I was little, I had a lot of sleepovers at my friend's house. My family had tons of allergies to pets, so we never had any, but my best friend had dogs and a very sweet special cat. I did not know anything about cats back then, so I would say hello and immediately run away. One summer, my friend set up a tent in his backyard and wanted to sleep outside. I was not thrilled, but we brought blankets, set everything up, and went to sleep. When I woke up around 7 or 8 in the morning, his cat was lying on my chest with her paws tucked under my chin and her nose practically touching mine. I lay there in absolute terror because I was convinced she was planning to attack me. She was purring, which I assumed meant she was preparing to strike. I tried to move slightly to get her off, but she stayed exactly where she was, occasionally flexing her paws. I think I stayed frozen for an hour until she finally decided to move on her own. I felt like I had narrowly escaped death. As I grew older, she became one of my favorite companions. Whenever I visited, she would come sit on me or next to me. Because of her, I grew to love and respect cats. She truly was special. Story 11. Generally, I am afraid of big dogs. I went to my new friend's house so we could get ready to go out clubbing. When I arrived, she introduced me to her stepdad's 3 Dobermans to help me feel comfortable. They were friendly, cute, and eager for attention. I gave each one a treat, and everything seemed fine. Later, we decided to ride in one car, so I stepped outside to move mine while she finished her makeup. When I headed for the back door, since I had come in through the front, dog number 1 cut me off and stood directly in front of it. I reached for the doorknob and it started snarling. I slowly turned to go upstairs instead, but the other 2 dogs had positioned themselves so that I was standing in a triangle, with all 3 watching me. I tried to stay calm, but when I took another step, the 2 in front stepped forward and growled. I tried calling for my friend, but the moment I said the first syllable of her name, the dogs bared their teeth. For context, I am 5 feet tall and female, and in that moment I was convinced this was how I was going to die. Their hackles were up, their teeth were gleaming, and they were closing in on me. Just then, my friend appeared, panicked, calling the dogs by name. They backed off immediately. She hugged me and opened the door while all 3 wagged their tails as if nothing had happened. Everything was absolutely not fine. It turned out they were rescues and someone had taught them to keep people in the house until they received a literal hug from the owner. She apologized repeatedly for forgetting about that. It has been years, and although we are still close, I do not visit her at that house anymore. Story 12. When I was about 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. It was an old place in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, and according to his dad, it had once belonged to Al Capone, though I was never sure how true that was. We used a top-floor apartment as our hangout spot, and it gave us easy access to the roof so we could go smoke cigarettes. One night we were about to head up, but I had to pee, so I told him I would meet him on the roof. After I finished, I went up the stairs to the attic area that led to the rooftop. There were no lights up there, so we always used our phones to see, and back then we only had old flip phones, so the dim screen was our only source of light as we navigated the cluttered attic. As I walked toward the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. It was not like the kind of shadow caused by my phone's light. This one felt solid, like a person. I followed it, thinking it was my friend messing with me. I kept telling him I knew it was him and that he needed to stop playing around. The shadow passed me a few more times before heading to the opposite side of the attic, and that was when I heard my friend's voice calling from downstairs. He had gotten a call from his girlfriend and had been in another room talking to her the entire time. I have no idea what that shadow figure was, but it terrified me, and I told him what happened and said I never wanted to go back up there again. Story 13. I was not inside the house, but just outside it. I went to visit my paternal grandmother, who always kept the door locked, so she had to come unlock it when I arrived. Her living room had large windows overlooking the street, and you could see the front door from there, so I could see her and she could see me. My grandmother was frail, dealing with severe arthritis, and she passed away not long after this happened. As she was walking toward the door, she suddenly fell in the living room. I had no key and I immediately panicked. I had no idea what to do. I was seconds away from breaking the living room window or calling emergency services when she somehow managed to pull herself back up using furniture for support. She unlocked the door, and that same day I demanded a key from my parents. I hate imagining what would have happened if she had not been able to stand again. I felt helpless, almost as helpless as the time my maternal grandfather fell, while crossing a busy street and traffic had just begun moving again. At least that time, I was able to lift him and get him to the side of the road before the cars reached us. Story 14. I spent the night at one of my best friend's houses in elementary school. It had been a super chill evening. We jumped on his trampoline, played basketball, played Xbox, and even watched a video we absolutely should not have seen at that age, which convinced me early on that the internet was dangerous and YouTube was something I should avoid. Around 8 in the evening, a mutual friend came over with her mother so she could look at my friend's hamster, which he was trying to sell. That was when things took a dramatic turn. His mom was very drunk and immediately began screaming at him, inches from his face, shouting some of the cruelest things I had ever heard. He just stood there, expressionless, while I broke down crying, unsure of what to do. We tried leaving the room, but she followed us, and eventually she escalated to hitting him in the face repeatedly. I managed to slip away since all of her focus was on him, and I hid in his little sister's room with her while we cried together. I remember asking God why someone I cared about had to live like that, because from his reaction, I could tell it was a normal occurrence. Eventually, things got so bad that his father came home and immediately loaded both of us into the car. He drove me home, and I spent the entire night talking with my mom, crying over everything I had seen. It opened my eyes to how different people's homes could be and made me deeply appreciate how patient and calm my own parents were, because I had definitely been a difficult kid at times. I still think about that night and feel anger. Over the years, I have seen that friend occasionally, and it seems like his life has improved a lot, which always makes me happy. We graduated high school, and last I heard, he is in college now. Story 15, I have two. First, when I was a kid, I had a neighbor named Z, who was also my best friend. I spent the night at his house often, and saw a lot of things that young me did not realize were deeply wrong. His parents were heavy drinkers and smoked pot. They were functional enough. His mom cooked and cleaned, his dad worked, but it was obvious they valued their habits more than their son. He had an uncle on his mom's side who showed up one day fresh out of prison and started living with them. He was a mean drunk, often violent towards Z's dad, and acted like he owned the place. One night when Z and I were about 8, we fell asleep on the sofas watching TV. At some point, the uncle came in, woke Z up, and became confrontational. I snapped awake to yelling and saw him shoving, choking, and lifting Z by the neck before slamming him onto the wooden floor so hard I felt the impact shake the couch. Z's mom and dad rushed out, and his mom called the police. The uncle was arrested, but I still remember the sound and feel of Z hitting the floor. It was awful. Second, in high school, I made a seemingly normal friend named Jay. She was a little edgy, but nothing seemed unusual at first. After hanging out at school for a while, she invited me over for a weekend sleepover, and I agreed. That became one of my biggest regrets. Jay was, for lack of a better word, unhinged. She showed me what she did for fun, trading pictures of random naked women with strangers in chat rooms like they were collectible cards. Later, she broke into her mom's liquor cabinet and drank wine. When her mom got home and confronted her, Jay grabbed a large glass vase, smashed it inside her closet, and then silently walked in and began cutting herself with the shards. No crying, no talking, just pure rage. I sat on the edge of her bed, frozen in fear. I never went back. Story 16. When I was about 12, around 2006 to 2007, I would often spend weekends at my friend's house in a very rural area. Mountains, long stretches of road with houses half a mile apart, almost no streetlights, and nights that were pitch black and eerie. His dad, a Marine veteran and avid hunter, had converted an old-school bus deep in the woods into a makeshift cabin. The seats were removed except for the driver's seat and the front four. Behind those were two couches, a toilet, a TV, a water tank, a bed, a bookshelf, and a suitcase full of MREs. He often used it for weekend camping trips, and as kids it was the coolest place imaginable. We had spent months exploring the woods. That particular time, however, mountain lions had been seen in the area, and we were warned not to wander too far. That night, my friend had several people over, including a few older neighborhood kids. We had snacks, our Game Boy SPs with Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and one of those bulky portable DVD players. We were fully set for a night of chaos. Around 10 at night, we started hearing twigs snapping outside. One of the older kids noticed first and got scared, but the rest of us brushed it off as small animals. Then the snaps got closer. Soon every one of us was tense. We nervously talked about what we would do if a mountain lion approached. All we had was a walkie-talkie, and it took 10 to 15 minutes to get from the bus to the house. After a while, the snapping stopped, and the tension faded. We went back to playing Pokemon, eating chips, and laughing. Eventually, we forgot all about it until the bus started shaking. At first, it was light enough to ignore, but the most paranoid among us pointed it out, and soon we were all quietly panicking. Every few minutes, it shook again. We opened a window, no wind, closed it, looked outside, nothing. Our nerves were shot. Then the shaking got stronger, definite, impossible to dismiss. The bus went silent as we sat frozen. Then came slow scraping along the back of the bus. All attempts at bravery vanished. We screamed. The oldest kid hid under a blanket, likely crying. Then we heard a deep, low growl at the far end. We were hysterical. We radioed my friend's dad. His mom answered, panicked when she heard us screaming, saying his dad was in the shower and she would get him and send him out in 10 minutes. Everything went silent again. We stayed perfectly still. Someone said we should open a window to see if it was safe. The bravest kid cracked it open, and immediately a massive shape slammed against the glass. We shrieked. The bus door began shaking violently. We thought we were done for. We screamed into the radio, begging for help. Suddenly, the doors flung open. We jumped, scrambling to the back of the bus, then heard hysterical laughter. We turned and saw my friend's dad doubled over, tears streaming down his face, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. He kept laughing for a full minute before he could even stand. Story 17. I was at my neighbor's house when I was around 12. She was the same age and she was not supposed to have visitors when her grandparents were not home. They came back earlier than expected, and we panicked because there was only one way in and out of the house. Instead of trying to escape, I hid under the covers in one of the rooms. Her grandparents immediately realized someone else was inside because they saw my sandals by the front door. They assumed it was a boy, so I stayed perfectly still under the blanket while my friend got yelled at. At one point, her grandmother came into the room I was hiding in and checked the closet, but she never looked under the covers because the bed was full of stuffed animals, and they hid the lump that was actually me. She even turned off the lights, and I was still terrified of the dark at that age. I stayed there for about 20 more minutes, listening to my friend getting grounded, before deciding I could probably sneak out. But their dogs gave me away. The moment they saw me, they started reacting, and her grandparents realized where I had been hiding. They ended up laughing once everything was cleared up and made sure we understood we were not in trouble. Looking back, I have no idea why we were both so scared. Story 18. I was at my ex-boyfriend's house. It was normal for us to lie in his bed cuddled up, watching TV, movies, or playing video games. We were both 18 and had been together for 2 years. We were supposed to be the only ones home. We were being intimate when his dad suddenly walked in and caught us in the act. I was thrown off completely as his dad started yelling at him while I was still in the bed. And at one point, he almost swung at me too. I scrambled out, grabbed my clothes and car keys, and ran down the hallway, pulling on my pants as I went, leaving my underwear behind. As I reached the door, my boyfriend was right behind me. He grabbed his dad's wallet off the table and left with me. He talked about getting a hotel, but I refused. It was 4th of July weekend, so instead we watched some fireworks, and then I took him home with me. My parents offered to let him live with us if he got a job. He did not want to, but he stayed the night on our couch and went home the next day. Looking back, the relationship was terrible, and he was a bad boyfriend and honestly a pretty bad person. But he was my first boyfriend, my first everything, so I stayed far longer than I should have. His parents had always seemed nice, and I thought I knew them well after 2 years. But the family dynamic was strange. They favored his older sister, constantly buying her things and ignoring him. And his mom babied him so much that he had no idea how to cook, clean, or do laundry. It was shocking and unsettling. After that incident, I never went back to his house unless other people were there, and I would never be alone around his dad again. Story 19. Jonathan, Andy, and I spent that summer between 4th and 5th grade rotating houses every 3 days. None of our parents had money, so the arrangement made meals easier and none of them complained. It became so routine that sometimes even our parents did not know whose house we were at. The rotation was perfect. We were never home long enough to annoy them, but we checked in often enough not to worry them. When we stayed at Andy's, we rarely saw his dad, mostly because he worked nights and we made sure to leave early in the morning if we slept there. Andy's dad was already terrifying, with half his face scarred from third-degree burns, and he was drunk most of the time. One night, we were asleep in Andy's bedroom when we woke to his mom screaming. The bedroom light flipped on, and his dad stood there holding a belt. He reached into the bottom bunk, grabbed Andy by the hair, and dragged him into the living room. Jonathan and I had no idea what to do, so we crept into the hallway and watched as his dad beat Andy and his mom with the belt, whipping and slapping them over and over. I will never forget the sound of the leather hitting their skin. They huddled together, trying to shield each other, while he kept beating them. Then he stopped, walked outside to his truck, and grabbed another beer. Andy's mom rushed to us, grabbed all 3 of us, and hid us behind the couch. Normally, it would have been a terrible hiding place, but their house was so cluttered that the piles of clothes and junk hid us completely. We lay back there for an hour listening as Andy's dad continued beating his mom and drinking until he finally passed out. She survived, but she was badly hurt. She called the police, then told us to leave before they arrived. We wandered around outside until sunrise. Story 20. When I was about 7, my cousin came over for a sleepover. Not long after, her best friend called and asked her to come to her house instead, which was unbelievably rude, and I still cannot believe her parents let her call my house to ask. My cousin was basically forced to invite me too, and this became the last time I was allowed to stay overnight with anyone outside the family until high school. It was around 6 in the evening, and I had already eaten, but her friend's family was just sitting down for dinner. I said I was not hungry, but they made me sit and take a big plate of food, everything I disliked. The main dish was Kraft macaroni mixed with canned tuna. Even now, that combination disgusts me. I refused to eat it. I was polite, saying no thank you, ma'am, but they insisted I was going to be punished. They made me sit at the table alone for over an hour while my cousin and her friend played. Then an hour later, we were forced to go to bed and told we could not get up or turn on the light. I slept on the floor while they shared the bed. It was the most unwelcome I had ever felt, and being treated like that by strangers made me terrified of staying at anyone's home again. I was scared someone might hit me, or worse, because you never know. Story 21. This happened last week. My mom and stepdad went out of town and hired a pet sitter for 5 days. I was burnt out from work and needed to do Christmas shopping, and since she lives 2 hours away near good stores, I asked if I could stay at her house for 2 days. She was glad because it saved her a couple of days of pet sitting fees, and she knew I was good with the dog. The first day, I lounged around, watched movies, and hung out with the dog. The second day, I planned to shop but was procrastinating, scrolling Reddit. I was maybe 5 minutes from leaving the house when I heard a sound outside. I stood up but realized it was just a neighbor loading something into their truck. As my eyes shifted away from the truck, I noticed smoke. It was drifting up from behind the couch. Thin at first, like when you blow out a candle. I had not lit any candles, so I went behind the couch and saw actual flames coming from inside it. Confused and startled, I filled a container with water and threw it onto the burning couch. I repeated it several times and checked for hot spots. The wooden frame inside the couch was hot to the touch. Eventually it cooled and the fire was fully out, but I was baffled as to how it started. The pet sitter was not supposed to arrive for another 6 hours. I would have been out shopping for 3 to 4 hours. The house absolutely would have burned down with the dog trapped inside. I pushed the small table back into place behind the couch and saw a single focused beam of light hitting the couch's fabric. My mom likes decorative pieces and had placed a glass crystal ball on that table. I know better now, but I never assessed her decor. That crystal ball had been sitting in the same spot with the same couch for nearly a year with no issues. But on that one day, the sun hit it at the perfect angle, and the ball acted like a magnifying glass, turning its beam into a fire starter. They could have lost the house, the dog, all the Christmas presents, everything because of one decoration. When I saw my mom again, we had a long talk about physics and sunlight. I stopped it before it spread, but the sheer coincidence of the situation was terrifying. Story 22. When I was 17, my friend was throwing a party while her parents were out for date night with their permission. We were all underage by about a year, but we had a few drinks because most of our parents preferred we drink in a safe environment. After a couple of hours, we were all in the kitchen watching a couple of guys attempt the cinnamon challenge. After the second guy finished, one of the girls turned away and screamed. Behind us stood a guy none of us knew, maybe around 20, with blood pouring from his nose, covering his face, hands, and shirt. A few of the bigger guys at the party guided him outside into the backyard and found out he had been assaulted by a substance-addicted man across the street. Everyone inside immediately started scrambling to hide the alcohol in the host's bedroom because someone was calling an ambulance and the police, and the host was calling her parents. 15 minutes later, we were all sitting nervously in the living room, holding cups of soda and looking unbelievably suspicious. When the police arrived, they spoke to the injured guy and a few of us before taking him away with the ambulance. Shortly afterward, the girl's parents arrived. Once things were cleared up, we got our alcohol back, though not before someone spilled half a bottle of tequila on her bed and a cup of gin and tonic on the carpet. Her parents ended up joining us for the rest of the evening. Story 23. When I was about 15, I spent the night at a good friend's house for the first time. Before going back to his place, the two of us had gotten really stoned, so we hid in the basement and played PlayStation to avoid any interaction with his parents, who were strongly against marijuana. After we sobered up a bit, we went outside to play basketball in the driveway. His dad came out and joined us. We played a game of 21, and he ended up winning. I had dry mouth and accidentally got sweat in my mouth, and without thinking, I spit on the driveway. Huge mistake. His dad immediately exploded, yelling that I was disrespectful and claiming I would be a bad influence on his son. He handed me his cell phone and demanded I call my parents to pick me up. He even pressed me about how much my father made each year and belittled me and my family, saying people like us were what was wrong with the world. The combination of being yelled at by a man I had just met, still being a bit high, and feeling terrible for my friend as his dad acted like a lunatic over me spitting on the ground sent me into near panic. My parents came to pick me up across the street because his father refused to let me wait on his property. The whole situation still sticks with me. The paranoia, the tension, and how fast his mood flipped over something so small. A few months later, his mom divorced his dad because he was mentally abusive and a severe alcoholic. Story 24, I was 14 and my best friend was 15. I was sleeping over the night before Christmas. His family lived in an upper-class neighborhood. His room was on the second floor, and around midnight we were messing around in the TV room when his dad yelled, "You better get in bed or I'm going to come up there and kick your ass." That shut us up instantly. Fast forward to about 2:30 in the morning when I heard loud banging on a wall, followed by his dad shouting, "Get back or I'm going to shoot." More banging followed. His dad yelled for my friend to wake up and call the police. Both of us were groggy and confused. And then we heard the most blood-curdling scream I have ever heard. A woman screaming like she was dying. My stomach dropped. His dad ran to his bedroom, grabbed his gun, and ran out the front door toward the neighbor's house, where we assumed the intruder had gone. My friend was on the phone trying to explain the situation to the police, but he barely understood what was going on. The police arrived in under 5 minutes. They found his dad outside, pointing his gun at two muscular men wrestling on the ground, yelling at them to hold someone down. The officers took over immediately. An ambulance came. Neighbors poured outside, and we learned what had actually happened. The screaming man had smoked synthetic marijuana spice, which was going around at the time. He freaked out, jumped a fence, ran away, got lost, came back, and started banging on the wrong door, my friend's house. Hearing the word gun, he spiraled into pure panic, convinced he was dying, and started screaming at the top of his lungs. His friend had tackled him to keep him from hurting anyone. My friend and I were shaken for days. I will never forget the man's wild, terrified eyes. Story 25. I regularly stayed over at a friend's house with another mutual friend. Let's call them J and B. When we first started staying there, we slept in the guest room with two beds. There was a cabinet in the room filled with China dolls. B loved them. J hated them and said they were creepy. I did not mind them much except for one doll with long black hair and a blood-red dress. That one made me uneasy. One night Jay was with me, so I know I did not dream what happened. I am a very light sleeper, and I woke up groggy, unsure what had disturbed me. Jay was awake too, even though they were normally a heavy sleeper, and they looked terrified, staring at the floor between our beds. I followed their gaze, and the red-dressed doll was sitting upright in the space between us. At first, I was just annoyed and assumed B had put it there as a joke. Poor Jay looked horrified. I muttered, "Stupid B," but before I could finish the sentence, the doll stood up on its own. I did not think. I ran straight out of the room and into B's bedroom. Jay dove onto my bed and followed me. B never believed us. When we checked the next morning, the doll was back in its case like nothing had happened. B insisted we were messing with her. After that, we refused to sleep in the guest room again and shared B's giant bed instead. Jay will not even look at the guest room anymore. Story 26. When I was 8, I was staying at my aunt's house for the summer because she was awesome and had a swimming pool. One day she had to attend a work seminar, so she dropped me off at a babysitter's house, another teacher I had never met. On the way, my aunt told me they had a dog, and I was thrilled because I love dogs. When we arrived, the babysitter told my aunt the dog was staying in a separate room because she was acting funny. I remember being disappointed, and both adults knelt down and told me not to go into the room with the dog because she was not feeling well. As they stepped outside to talk while my aunt left, I decided it was very important to check on the sick dog myself, certain a few pets would make her feel better. I opened the door, peeked inside, and saw a big sleepy basset hound named Morgan lying on the floor. I crept in, squatted nose to nose with her, and gently petted her head while whispering, "Morgan, are you okay?" Everything went red. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital getting a ton of shots, my nose was barely attached, and blood was everywhere. The babysitter was crying and yelling at my aunt. The doctors made her leave, and I passed out. I woke again to a huge needle going into my eye. Later, family and friends were around me, explaining that doctors had taken skin from my butt cheek to rebuild part of my face. Only days later did I fully understand what had happened. The dog had actually eaten a bat and was supposed to be in a 10-day rabies quarantine. The babysitter refused to bring her in because she feared the dog would be put down, so she lied to the vet and claimed the dog had passed away. Morgan had been rabid, and when I got close, she bit almost half my nose off. My aunt later told me the dog had been shaking me like a rag doll before they pulled her off. At the hospital, the babysitter told police I must have provoked the dog and that it had shown no strange behavior. She later returned with a basket of flowers, saying that would be the only thing she planned to offer. No help with medical bills and no intention of surrendering the dog. The police eventually intervened with animal control. I ended up with stitches, a strange scar, a tomato nose, and a year of being called chew toy at school. It all worked out though because my aunt took me to Olive Garden with my mom, I got cake and a stuffed toy, and I did not get rabies. My aunt and that babysitter had a very strained work relationship afterward, and I am prone to sinus infections now, but it is okay. I was honestly sad for the dog, and I never get nose to nose with any animal anymore. Story 27. When I was 14, I was house sitting and dog sitting for my older brother at his new place. He had two Great Danes and a Rottweiler, all of whom I considered big softies because they had never shown any aggression and were always sweet to me. That night I stayed up until about 1 in the morning. Around 3, I woke up to a sudden jolt from one of the Great Danes, and then I heard a loud crash. The dogs took off, silent, fast, and deadly serious down the stairs. Seconds later, I heard someone screaming for help. I ran downstairs to find a man being attacked. One Great Dane had his leg, the Rottweiler had latched onto his arm, and the other Great Dane was biting any place he could reach. A neighbor, having heard the commotion, burst in and shouted for me. I opened the door, showed him what was happening, and he told me to call the police while he held the burglar at gunpoint. After we managed to lock the dogs away, the police and an ambulance arrived quickly. According to my brother, the intruder lost his arm up to just below the elbow and now walks with a limp. We know this because after finding religion in prison, he visited my brother to ask for forgiveness and said he wanted to speak to me. My brother refused, even though by then I was already in college. Story 28. I was on a night out drinking with a girlfriend of mine, and she told me I could crash at her place afterward. A few drinks and some dancing later, she met a guy at the bar she was clearly into. He invited her back to his place, and while she played it coy, she secretly slipped me her house keys and told me to let myself in and stay there as planned. I stayed out with friends and she left with him. Hours later, around 2 in the morning, I took a bus to her house and stumbled through the front door. The living room light was on, which felt odd because she lived alone and I didn't remember it being left that way. I walked inside, tossed my handbag on the sofa, turned the light off, and went upstairs. I pushed open her bedroom door, fell straight into bed without turning on the light, and was too drunk to bother taking my clothes off. I passed out fast. About an hour later, I woke up because of a faint sound. Half asleep, I turned my head toward the noise. The wall beside the bed had mirrored sliding wardrobe doors so I could see myself, the bed, and part of the floor. I drifted back to sleep until another loud sound woke me around 3:30 in the morning. I looked at the wardrobes again and saw a tiny glimmer of light reflected from underneath the bed. Without moving, I focused on the reflection and slowly made out 2 eyes blinking and a set of teeth smiling back at me. Someone was under the bed and had been there the entire time. A cold panic washed over me and I froze. In just a few seconds, though, it felt like forever. I mapped out the path to the front door in my head and remembered my handbag was downstairs. I counted down silently from 3, then bolted out of bed, flew down the stairs, grabbed my bag, and sprinted down the street as fast as I could. When I was far enough away that my legs felt like they were going to give out, I called the police. They arrived at the house and found the man still hiding under the bed. If I had gone into the kitchen when I first arrived, I would have seen the back door window smashed and the door hanging open. The man turned out to be harmless. He had walked out of a private ward a mile away that housed people with severe learning difficulties and mental illnesses. He had a childlike personality and thought hiding under the bed was just a fun game. Story 29. When I was around 20, I was dating a guy who had extremely wealthy friends, like billionaire wealthy, while we definitely were not. My boyfriend and I were traveling to a vacation spot in Maine and stopped to spend the night at the home of the grandmother of one of his wealthy friends, who planned to travel on with us the next day. Her house was an enormous mansion, the biggest home I had ever been inside. I was intimidated and went to bed early in a room of my own. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly, wide awake for no reason. The house was silent and completely dark, yet I felt compelled to get out of bed and wander around. This was nothing like me. I was a respectful guest and would never snoop or explore someone's home at night, let alone the mansion of an elderly woman. Still, I wandered through the huge house with no idea why I was doing it. Eventually, I found myself going down the staircase to the ground floor and continuing through the dark halls. After about 10 minutes, I started hearing a faint noise, like a cat or a baby crying. I followed the sound and found the elderly grandmother on the floor, barely able to call for help. She had fallen on her way to the bathroom. I ran to get my boyfriend, and we helped her back into bed. She was grateful, and the family thanked me. The next morning over breakfast, someone suddenly asked how I had found her. What was I doing awake at that time? The house was so massive that there was no way I could have heard her weak cries from my bedroom upstairs. That was when I realized I had absolutely no explanation. I had woken up abruptly, felt compelled to wander through a house I barely knew, and somehow ended up exactly where she needed help. I still have no idea why. Story 30. We used to have a neighbor who lived alone. He was young, Italian, and seemed incredibly cool to 12-year-old me. He would talk to us over the fence while he smoked, and although my parents allowed the fence conversations, they never let us go to his house, even though he invited us multiple times. One day while my parents were out, one of my friends was already at his place for some reason, and the two of them kept pressuring me to climb over the fence and join them. Being a clueless 12-year-old, I thought, what could possibly go wrong? The moment I got inside, they tried offering me alcohol, cigarettes, and homemade food. The house smelled awful, like stale cigarettes and something far worse, and creepy religious decorations were everywhere. The smell alone made me refuse anything they offered, and I eventually made up an excuse to leave. After that day, I avoided both the neighbor and that friend. My parents were furious when they found out, from my tattletale sister, that I had gone over there. A few years later, the neighbor was arrested for exactly what you can probably guess. And that was when I realized why my parents had such bad instincts about him in the first place. It also made me wonder whether my friend had been groomed. I am positive my parents didn't know he was a S offender or anything, but they clearly sensed something was wrong. Good parental instincts, I suppose. Either way, I definitely dodged something awful. Story 31. I was around 17 or 18. A friend and I went to our mutual friend's house to play video games while his parents were out of town. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, we decided to have a last smoke before bed. It was pouring outside, so the guy who lived there said we could smoke in the garage. My friend and I went in, lit our cigarettes, and chatted. As I glanced around, I noticed the washing machine running. I looked closer at the little glass window and suddenly saw a hand pressed against the inside of it. Not a limp hand, but one actively pressing. I was stunned, thinking it had to be some kind of illusion. I turned to tell my friend, but he was pale and staring at the same thing. Without speaking, we both stepped outside immediately. We told our friend, trying to laugh it off, but he went completely serious and said, "Oh, you saw the hand?" He claimed he had seen it a few times too. He stayed weirdly calm, like it was normal. After cooling off, we became convinced he was pranking us. So hours later, we asked him to come to the garage with us and empty the washing machine. Nothing but clothes came out, nothing strange at all. We never went back to that house, and to this day, we still have no explanation for what we saw. Story 32. When I was 7, I went to my friend's house for the third time ever. It was always hard to get permission to visit, but I assumed it was because his family was less well off and felt embarrassed. Every time I had been there, his dad was passed out in his recliner, and we were told never to go into the garage. This time, my friend wanted to act cool and decided we should go in anyway, because his mom was out and his dad seemed knocked out. At first, I didn't notice anything strange. We messed around for a bit, but when we turned to head back inside, I finally saw it. A huge Nazi flag covering the back wall, with other symbols like SS logos and 1488. Up until that moment, I had never felt fear like that. I said nothing until we got back to his room, and then I blurted out a million questions. His answers, although I didn't fully understand the terms yet, made it clear that his dad was abusive and violent, and very much a neo-Nazi. We were still talking when we suddenly heard his father moving. Then the garage door opened, slammed shut, and heavy footsteps started coming toward the bedroom. My friend whispered, "You should get out of here." I didn't hesitate. I ran out only to come face to face with the angriest person I have ever seen. He was between me and the door, so I sprinted straight at him, slid under his legs, and bolted out of the house. Outside, our mothers were arriving. I told his mom she needed to help her son, and immediately begged my mom to take me home. Until that day, I thought Nazis were just a terrible part of history long gone. I learned very quickly they weren't. Story 33. I went to a girls' night at a coworker's house, and when we arrived, her dogs were shut in a room whining. My friend and I mentioned that we love dogs and they could be let out if that was okay. The host said, "They're a little rowdy, but they'd love to be out." She opened the door and stepped aside as two huge pit bull shepherd mixes came bursting out of the room. They looked furious, and before I could react, one of them had my hand in his mouth. He thrashed my hand around while growling, and blood splattered onto the wall and carpet. I was sobbing, unable to pull away. They finally got him off me by kicking his legs out from under him. My hand was torn open and bleeding everywhere. At the ER, I needed stitches, x-rays, and shots, and the doctor told me that if the dog had bitten my wrist with just a little more pressure, he would have torn into the veins. It was extremely traumatic. When we reported the incident, we learned that the same dog had attacked their baby nephew not long before, biting his face. I missed 4 full days of work and had to take strong antibiotics, and my coworker threw a tantrum about having to pay for my medical bills and medication. It remains the worst experience I have ever had in someone else's home. Story 34, I was hanging out with my best friend, her roommate, and her male friend in Atlanta. It was around 2 in the morning when we finally got tired. We returned to the apartment, fed the dogs, and got ready for bed. There were 2 dogs, a black lab that belonged to the roommate, and a Yorkie we were babysitting. I ended up sleeping on the couch in the living room right by the front door and the Yorkie's cage. I finally fell asleep around 4, but 20 minutes later, the Yorkie started barking like he was seeing a ghost. I told him to stop. He quieted down, but then 20 minutes later, he went wild again. I could hear the black lab barking in the other room too. Dogs have those weird sixth senses, so I knew something was off. Before I could get up, I heard bang, bang, bang on the front door, hard enough that I felt the vibrations. It sounded like someone was using a blunt object to break it down. I froze in place, trying to process what was happening. I ran into my best friend's room to tell her, and half asleep she said, "It's probably just the people upstairs making noise." I didn't buy it. I went back to the living room and sat at the kitchen table because there was no way I was going back to sleep. I grabbed something to use as a weapon and waited until sunrise. About 10 minutes later, my best friend came running out screaming, "There's someone on the balcony!" All of us jumped up ready to fight. We looked through her window and saw this big, dark shape moving on the balcony, but it was so dark we couldn't make out what it was. It genuinely looked like some kind of creature. We panicked and called the police. Break-ins were common in Atlanta, but this felt unreal. Then the male friend came back into the room and said, "Y'all, that's Joyce on the balcony." Joyce was the Yorkie's owner, the one we were pet sitting for, who was supposed to be out handling things. Instead, she was blackout drunk and trying to break into the apartment instead of calling or texting us. My best friend was furious and had a long talk with her. We were relieved it wasn't an actual intruder, but the whole situation was terrifying. She could have been anyone, a serial killer, a burglar, you name it. The police eventually showed up 45 minutes later, which did not make us feel any safer. I still think about that night. What if it had been someone dangerous? What if someone got hurt? What if the police hadn't shown up at all? It made me paranoid, and now I constantly check that every door is locked. Story 35, I convinced my friend S to throw a birthday party at her house. Everything was going great. And since we all invited our own groups, there were all kinds of interesting people hanging out and having fun. Early in the night, one guy who came with one of S's friends got extremely drunk and started making every woman at the party uncomfortable. He kept walking up to girls and saying creepy, inappropriate things. A bunch of us went to the backyard to talk, and it turned out literally every girl had been approached by him and felt weirded out. So S and I went up to him and said, "Hey man, you've got to go. You can't do that. Have a good night." He got furious and stormed off down the street, leaving his car behind. We figured he'd come back sober the next morning to get it. No big deal. About an hour later, I heard screaming from the front living room. We all ran to see what was happening, and the guy was back this time. He had the girl he came with by the hair in the front yard, yanking her around and screaming at her. The men rushed outside to get her away from him. I pulled her inside and locked her in the bathroom in case he forced his way in. Then he pulled out a knife, made a few stabbing motions in the chaos, and even punched S in the mouth. Everyone turned on him instantly. He got his ass handed to him all up and down the street. We thought he had left again, but instead he got into his car, while a big group of us stood in the yard checking everyone for injuries. He floored it straight through S's yard, missing people by inches. He flipped around and did it again, 4 or 5 times, getting closer each pass until he was driving directly at people, forcing everyone to dive out of the way. A couple of people got clipped by his mirrors, and one guy hurt his arm. But thankfully, no one was seriously injured. The cops arrived, barricaded the street, dragged him out of the car at gunpoint, and ordered all of us back into the house. He went to jail, and S had his car towed immediately. Shockingly, we ended up continuing the party afterward. Most of us needed a drink after that. The girl from the bathroom got home safely, and S walked away with one hell of a birthday story. Story 36, I still think about revenge on this guy. When I was around 10 to 12 years old, maybe even younger, I was friends with a kid down the road. It was a rural area. My closer friends had moved away, and he was basically the only person my age within biking distance. He was older than me, but a grade or two below. A real idiot. From trashy parents in a trashy trailer that stuck out like an eyesore. I once watched him pour gasoline on his family's burn pile, bend over to light it, and roast his own face in a burst of flames. I should have listened to my parents when they said they didn't like him and didn't want me around him. But of course, that made me want to rebel and hang out with him more, even though I didn't actually like him. We played video games, explored the woods, rode ATVs, and caused trouble like kids do. Then one day he showed me his dad's revolver while we were alone in the house. I had no idea what caliber it was, and I am 100% sure he didn't check the cylinder. Cool, I like guns, I thought, until I saw his face shift like he just had the world's worst idea. He looked at the gun, then at me, smirked, and pointed it straight at my chest. I said something like, "Dude, that's not funny. Stop." I tried stepping to the side, and he kept aiming at me. I backed out of his parents' room, telling him over and over to quit it, and he just followed with the gun trained on me. Then I started running toward the other end of the trailer, dodging piles of junk, and he ran after me laughing like it was a game. By the time I got to a bedroom, I was crying. I dropped to the floor, curled up with my hands over my face like that would stop a bullet, and begged him to stop. He stood over me laughing while pointing the gun directly at my face. In my mind, I didn't know if he was capable of pulling the trigger on purpose, but I definitely knew accidents happen. I was just waiting for him to accidentally blow my head off. When he finally stopped, I bolted out the door, grabbed my bike, and rode home as fast as I could. I never went back. For years after, every time I passed that house, sometimes even now, 20 years later, I'd get hit with the same rage and fear. I've spent way too much time imagining how I could have gotten revenge or how his life might have fallen apart. Even writing this brings those feelings right back. Story 37, I had a coworker who invited me over for his dog's birthday. He was a strange guy, impossible to describe properly, but he was always friendly with me. He had been inviting me to meet his dogs for months and was starting to seem disappointed that I never came, so me and my friend finally decided to go. None of what happened that day is exaggerated. We pulled up to his house and immediately heard nonstop barking. From the end of the long driveway, we could already see two of the biggest dogs I had ever laid eyes on. We hesitated until he came out through the screen door and waved us in. He let the dogs outside while he gave us the tour. The first stop was what he called the New Year's Eve room. It was June, but this living room was fully decorated with balloons, streamers, party hats, noisemakers, everything. He said it was a waste of time to take the decorations down, only to put them back up again every year. Then we met his girlfriend in the kitchen. She was about 80 years old, and he was maybe 35 or 40. He kept asking us if we thought she was Psy, and watched our reactions way too closely. Things only got stranger. He showed us his bedroom, which contained a bed, a desk, and a fully functioning toilet installed just a few feet from the mattress. No sink, just a toilet in the bedroom. Then we went to the backyard, which consisted of a deflated inflatable pool that leaked a constant trickle of water, flooding the entire yard. He insisted we get in the pool with him and his girlfriend. We declined. Finally, he took us to the basement. That was the worst part. There were no lights except in one tiny room. Inside, it was a homemade hot tub surrounded by exposed electrical wiring. Sitting in the tub was a Vietnamese boy, maybe 13 years old, completely relaxed like it was the most normal place in the world. We asked him what he was doing there, and he said he liked helping my coworker with projects in his free time. We left shortly after that. I never felt in danger, but it was easily the weirdest experience I have ever had at someone else's house.